from the Gospel of Mark, chapter 8, verses 22 through 26. Let us hear now the word of the Lord. They came to Bethsaida, and some people brought a blind man and begged Jesus to touch him. He took the blind man by the hand and led him outside the village. When he had spit on the man's eyes and put his hands on him, Jesus asked, "Do you see anything?" The man looked up and said, "I see people. They look like trees walking around." Once more, Jesus put his hands on the man's eyes. Then his eyes were opened, his sight was restored, and he saw everything clearly. Jesus sent him home, saying, "Don't even go into the village." The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Today, many blind people are able to function independently and engage in many of the same activities as sighted people. Ancient societies, however, lacked the services and education that make this quality of life possible. Blind people back then were led everywhere, and this man was led by others to Jesus. There's something very fascinating about this story. Namely, it takes Jesus 2 times to restore this man's vision entirely. By this point, both observers and readers have come to expect an instant cure. But we don't get that here in this encounter with Jesus. There's a scene in this quasi-soap opera about a megachurch called Greenleaf. A teenager is at a Bible study. She's asked what she thinks about that 2-part healing. And she says that she thinks that for the first time when the man says, "I see people, they look like trees walking around," that meant it was for everyone to understand how we are all connected underneath with our roots. There's something that scientists call mycorrhizal networks. Trees share water and nutrients through a complex interconnected set of roots. And they all use them to communicate. They send distress signals about drought and disease or insect attacks. Then other trees are able to alter their behavior when they receive these messages. Perhaps Jesus did not need a second chance to cure the man's blindness. Perhaps through this healing, Jesus was teaching a greater message about community. The man was freed from his dependence on people to lead him around. He was finally able to see and therefore live life more on his own, but not really. Really, the whole community is enmeshed. Their roots connecting underground, communicating distress, communicating wisdom, sharing resources. We need this message, especially now. But the thing that really sets this blind man apart, the thing that is really always quite edgy about Jesus' healing miracles, is just how vulnerable the sick person must become. For most, though not all, of Jesus' healings are actually public. It takes a fair amount of desperation and bravery for one to put themselves in that position. So, where are you in your roots? I fear trees are much more intuitive than our own human communities. The disciples, having missed important lessons immediately prior to this account, needed that lesson. And the lesson came through a demonstration of weakness, of a community ushering a sick man to a healer, of a sick man undergoing a healing act publicly. We are like trees walking around. So how are your roots? How are your neighbors' roots? Next, we're going to hear an old hymn written by a woman named Anne Steele, who suffered a lifetime of chronic illness. In addition to her lifetime illness, her betrothed died in a freak accident right before the wedding day. It was following that accident that she wrote this hymn, "Dear Refuge of My Weary Soul." Now, what distinguishes weariness from exhaustion is not just that weariness is more of a condition of the soul than of the body, but also that weariness is most often a condition that arises in us when our pain does not have a certain outcome, a certain end date. Anne Steele does not shy away from the pain of weariness. In the lyrics, she writes of this suffering, but she also writes of refuge. She also writes in the humility that hope exists far beyond any of our circumstances. In our wearied roots, may we take comfort in the roots of others, in the very real rootedness of our souls enveloped in the love of God. Amen. Dear refuge of my weary soul, on thee will troubles rise on thee when waves of trouble roll. My fainting hope relies. To thee I tell each rising grief, for thou alone canst heal. Thy word can bring a sweet relief for every pain I feel. But oh, when gloomy doubts prevail, I fear to call thee mine. The springs of comfort seem to fail, and all my hopes decline. Yet, gracious God, where shall I flee? Thou art my only trust, and still my soul would cleave to thee, though prostrate in the dust. Hast thou not bid me seek thy face, and shall I seek in vain? And can the ear of sovereign grace be deaf when I complain? No, still the ear of sovereign grace attends the mourner's prayer. Oh, may I ever find access to breathe my sorrows there. Thy mercy seat is open still. Here let my soul retreat with humble hope. Attend thy will and wait beneath thy feet. Thy mercy seat is open still. He led my soul retreat with humble hope. Attend thy will and wait beneath thy feet.
Mark chapter 5, verses 1 through 20. They went across the lake to the region of the Gerasenes. When Jesus got out of the boat, a man with an evil spirit came from the tombs to meet him. This man lived in the tombs, and no one could bind him any more, not even with a chain. For he had often been chained hand and foot, but he tore the chains apart and broke the irons on his feet. No one was strong enough to subdue him. Night and day among the tombs and in the hills, he would cry out and cut himself with stones. When he saw Jesus from a distance, he ran and fell on his knees in front of him. He shouted at the top of his voice, "What do you want with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? Swear to God that you won't torture me." For Jesus had said to him, "Come out of this man, you evil spirit." Then Jesus asked him, "What is your name?" "My name is Legion," he replied, "for we are many." And he begged Jesus again and again not to send them out of the area. A large herd of pigs was feeding on the nearby hillside. The demons begged Jesus, "Send us among the pigs, allow us to go into them." He gave them permission, and the evil spirits came out and went into the pigs. The herd, about 2,000 in number, rushed down the steep bank into the lake and were drowned. Those tending the pigs ran off and reported this in the town and countryside, and the people went out to see what had happened. When they came to Jesus, they saw the man who had been possessed by the legion of demons sitting there, dressed and in his right mind, and they were afraid. Those who had seen it told the people what had happened to the demon-possessed man and told about the pigs as well. Then the people began to plead with Jesus to leave their region. As Jesus was getting into the boat, the man who had been demon-possessed begged to go with him. Jesus did not let him, but said, "Go home to your family and tell them how much the Lord has done for you and how he has had mercy on you." So the man went away and began to tell in the Decapolis how much Jesus had done for him, and all the people were amazed. I spent the last week praying for a family and their daughter, Kim. Kim is in her late 20s and has suffered from bipolar and borderline personality disorder for years. Sometimes she takes medicine to help, but more frequently she goes without and unravels. On April 14th, after days of her mental health deteriorating, a neighbor called the police out of fear. They didn't understand Kim's mental health challenges, her ramblings, and her behavior, so Kim was taken to the county jail. And there she stayed for the last 2 months, her mind unraveling even further without treatment in a cell. And thankfully, 3 inmates rang the alarm this past week. They alerted Kim's family, and a battle ensued to get Kim the help she needed. On Wednesday morning, we received good news that Kim was finally transferred to a treatment facility. This past week, as I prayed for Kim and her family, another man in a cold cell came to mind. A man shunned from town and labeled a demoniac. He lives with this daily unraveling of his mind. He tears through the restraints and the chains that are put on him. He is tortured by a legion of voices which impel him to violently harm himself. Like Kim, no one can control him, and he can't control himself. But then Jesus comes to town with his disciples, and his healing disrupts the status quo of the town. As a herd of pigs drown to their death, and as the townspeople fear the consequences of Legion being set free. This week, as I prayed for Kim and her family, I felt the fear. Kim, fearful of treatment and perhaps even herself. Fearful neighbors not understanding her behavior. Fearful that she would hurt herself or others. And it pushed me to imagine this passage for the first time through the lens of fear. How does fear impact each of the characters? How does fear impact the way we react? If I'm being honest, I'd love to rewrite the end of this story. Rewrite it in such a way that the townspeople respond to Legion's healing with celebration instead of fear. Rewrite it so they don't force Jesus away. I'd love to see them drop to their knees in awe and thanksgiving to Jesus for restoring their neighbor. I'd love to see them embrace the healing of this man and fold him back into every part of community life. I'd love to rewrite this story, but I can't. But I can rewrite my own through learning from this one. You see, sometimes Jesus teaches us the right thing to do through giving us a glimpse of God's vision through a story of what not to do. So how, when I need help, can I run to Jesus and fall at my knees? How can we bless others rather than pull back out of fear? How can we respond when the status quo of our towns or our churches or our families are disrupted? How can we be better at caring for those whose minds have unraveled by mental illness? And how can I show the same mercy as Jesus? How might we and our communities attempt to live into this better vision that he gives us? Amen.